Hey everyone, welcome back to Digital Foundry for this, the 137th edition of DF Direct Weekly. Packed show for you this week, and joining me to get through all of this stuff, first of all, John Linneman, hello.
Rich, if only there was an extra 3 in that number, we would be completely elite. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I'm liking it, 137.
Mm-hmm. We'll get there in about 10 years' time.
Oh my goodness, no.
Oh no.
That sounds intense.
That's a lot.
You get less for murder. And of course, Alex Battaglia.
Yeah, I feel like, we're all trapped in just these like boxes now. We'll never leave. It's always DF Direct all the time.
These boxes.
Okay, well, with that out of the way, that sort of nihilistic view of the DF Direct situation, let's crack on with our first news topic. Okay, so this one came out of nowhere, and this is part of what I love about this industry, is that sometimes, not often, there is a genuine surprise that we can drop on our audience. It just comes out of nowhere. Nobody seemed to guess this was coming, but the Steam Deck OLED is here. The reviews dropped yesterday. As of this recording, we had our video up, and there's a bunch of other great reviews out there as well. Well, what could I say about this? I just love this machine, right? Because
you can tell.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's actually quite an interesting story there, John, because you were talking about the sort of excitement in the intro to my video, and it was basically the case that I do usually do a pretty tightly scripted video, but for that I was just reading the script and I just went off script because it just wasn't really conveying what I was feeling about this machine, which is it's quite the thing. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at a Steam Deck. It looks much the same. That's it's almost stealth-like in the fact that it presents identically to the standard Steam Deck. But then you turn on the unit, the screen comes on, and it is an absolutely amazing OLED display.
Would you say it's an absolute unit?
Well, whatever you like. But the bottom line is that. I fired up Ori and the Will of the Wisps, which is my go-to game for HDR, right? And it's like having an LG television, top-end LG television in the palm of your hand, right? And what bigger recommendation can you have for gaming than that? It's just a brilliant companion to games. It just transforms the likes of Ori, anything that has a good HDR implementation. And even if it doesn't have a good HDR implementation, you've still got that amazing contrast. I mean, we've got some questions that the audience have got here, but I'm interested in your reaction to this, John, because, actually quite a few people are wondering in our supporter group whether you're going to buy one, because the screen is essentially the reason you didn't buy the original, right?
That is right. Yeah, I hate the screen in the original Steam Deck. I think it's bad. I think it is a bad screen. It's everything I don't like about LCD thrown in there, right? The viewing angles aren't great. The backlight is extremely evident. It just doesn't look good to my eye. And I said back then when this was first revealed, like I probably wouldn't bother with a Steam Deck until it gets an OLED screen. And everybody was like, I don't think it's going to happen. But here we are. Yeah. And then of course the other problem was the battery life was pretty poor, I would say. Like it's, reasonable enough, but you can't get that much for gameplay time when running higher end applications.
It's a struggle. That's the bottom line. Yeah, you have to be thinking about your settings. You have to be thinking about your frame rate caps in order to eke out extra minutes, right? And the crazy thing is, of course, that this is the best case scenario for PC handheld gaming at the moment.
Yeah.
So
that's the thing, right? Is like this one looks like it's just long enough where you can almost treat it more like a Switch and just like enjoy the games on there, right? Like, the high end stuff is still going to drain the battery pretty quickly, but it seems reasonable enough. And between that and the screen, that's basically what I was looking for. And also it sounds like the fan noise has improved.
Yeah.
So you say, Rich, and the original Steam Deck had this kind of shrill sound to it that I found somewhat unpleasant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you take all those things together, I'm just like, well, Steam Deck, whatever. But this one does actually genuinely have me tempted. I might have to treat myself to one of these when we get, if I can actually get one. I don't know. I mean, the pre-order situation.
Yeah.
Maybe I won't be able to get one. We'll see. But
yeah.
I would like one because it definitely looks like the machine I had wanted from the original Steam Deck now. And there's a lot of stuff I'd love to play on that. And really HDR and OLED, that sells me big time, because the screen, we saw this with the Switch, right, Rich, where the original Switch LCD, which is better than the Steam Deck LCD, by the way, I would say they're neither are good. Moving to the Switch OLED was like game changing. It felt like a generational upgrade, just because it impacted the quality of what you were seeing on the screen so dramatically. And this one is a step up over the Switch OLED, especially given that it's HDR capable and supports up to 90 hertz, which is awesome. So yeah, this is going to be a huge deal, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. The comparisons with the Switch OLED are quite interesting because, well, this is in a different league simply because of HDR, right? 1,000 nits peak brightness.
Really bright.
And again, that's one of the reasons I chose Ori is the Will of the Wisps to kind of show the game, because it's a killer HDR game, right? And you get that dynamic range, and you just see the fact that it is like a proper high-end OLED with all of the features. And I'm actually hoping that this will serve as kind of like a reference screen for developers when they're doing their games, because there isn't really anything close to a reference screen out there apart from the LG OLEDs, right?
Right.
I'm just sort of blown away by it. There's a lot of other stuff to talk about, but Alex, I'm interested in your initial reactions.
So, like John, I wasn't as perturbed by the screen because I just kind of was like, whatever, it's a handheld. Like, I didn't have any Switch OLED experience because I wouldn't play that thing anyway. Like, I just wouldn't. But with this, I knew what like an LCD looks like, and I was just like, whatever. Like, I just lived with it. But the thing that I even stressed in my original Crisis video that I did was like, oh yeah, but you can play for a while, but it isn't that long. And I think the added battery life is the thing that I really was happy with Valve actually stressing, that they're not going to do a Steam Deck 2 spec upgrade, because they have the new APUs out there. And this is not using the latest AMD tech. It's using a die shrink. And I think going the direction of a die shrink makes much more sense for a mobile console, PC, handheld, hybrid thing, just because you want to actually have the most premium mobile experience possible. And being tethered to a wall is probably not the best thing. So I'm actually most happy about the introduction of battery life kind of enhancements. Second to that is actually the screen's increased refresh rate. 60 hertz is cool. 90 hertz is way cooler. It's much more, for different types of games, you just have a lot more flexibility there. And I think the thing that Rich's video didn't go into that we'll probably talk about some other point in time is the potential latency reductions, because instead of like the old screen when you do a 30 FPS lock, which was probably a recommended thing to do for a lot of games you play on the Steam Deck, is it would, just like most likely double or triple the buffering in most games. And the way you do it, it's just like a much higher latency thing than other types of software locking to 30 FPS. And if you're doing that by actually just running 3 refreshes of the same image and a 90 hertz container for 30 FPS, it should have a lot less latency. And we see that on PC if you do, for example, like 40 FPS and 120 hertz container, which is a recommendation. So these things are all great, and I guess that'll also apply to if you want to do 40 FPS, and it would maybe go down to 80 hertz. I don't know how exactly
That's exactly how it works. Yeah, okay. Basically, there's a single slider now that you just define your target frame rate, and then it basically works out the multipliers for the screen refresh rate. So yes, if you select 40, then it will switch to 80 hertz. If you go to 45, it will go to 90. It's just a clean divisor by 2 there.
Just odd that it's not VRR capable.
Yeah, that was the last thing I was
offer you that granular control. Why not VRR?
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's I don't know. Let's plow into some support the questions here, because we're covering a lot of ground here. We had this one from Cowboy Lou. Hey, Rich, with the changes to how the deck screen handles frame rate caps, have there been any improvements to input latency? We're going to check that, because there's no reason we can't just strap an NVIDIA LDAT sensor to the screen. But my reaction is basically that yes, it probably does, and probably more so, for example, if you're 40 FPS in an 80 hertz container, whereas before you would have been 40 FPS in a 40 hertz container. Something we'd have to check there. This question from Edna Mode: while the Steam Deck becomes the go-to handheld for the OLED screen, the ROG Ally and other devices can play more games from this generation. If you guys had to buy a Steam Deck OLED or a 7840U device, what would you choose? That's an interesting question there. And it's similar to the one from Mendo Shutaro. As impressive as Steam Deck OLED is, does its lack of VRR and a significantly faster GPU put it at a disadvantage when compared to ROG Ally and the Lenovo Legion? This is an interesting point because...
Those names.
Yeah.
Oh my God, those names. They're awful. They're so bad.
Lenovo
The Steam Deck sounds like... Gosh, it sounds like cool. 90s PC goodness, and those things sound all like 2010s PC terribleness. You know what I mean?
I was going to say like mid 2000s PC graphics card boxes.
Is this like they're like sponsored by Limp Bizkit and Korn and all these other things?
Evil Commando.
Evil Commando. I was just about to say that's what we need.
We need an
Evil Commando.
Oh man!
It's the next one.
The Evil Commando.
Let's try and answer some of these questions though, right? Because from my perspective, it's pretty straightforward, right? All of those 7840U devices and the Z1 Extreme devices like the Lenovo Legion and the ROG Ally. Look, they will play games that the Steam Deck can't, right? That's the bottom line. You can have really good experiences with games that kind of struggle on the Steam Deck. That's the benefit of more performance. It's typically around 30 to 50% more performance. The problem is you're not getting that at 15 watts, which is what the Steam Deck is using. And the battery is basically the same. The batteries are usually the same size as what's in the Steam Deck or the new Steam Deck, 40 watt hour or 50 watt hour. So you're looking at an hour of battery life, an hour 10, an hour 15, if you're lucky, when playing, these demanding games. So this is the choice that's in front of you, right? You accept the performance limitations of the Steam Deck OLED, but you get that amazing screen, you get that amazing battery life, you get those really decent acoustics, or you go for one of these other devices. And, we've heard from Oliver, he loves his ROG Ally, and, it's a really good piece of kit, right? But he's sitting there with power banks plugged in to get to get a decent amount of battery life from it. It's not quite the handheld dream, is it? I'm curious what you think about this, Alex. Would you opt for the Steam Deck OLED or something more powerful, but with let's be honest here, crappy battery life?
It's really up to your use case. I think the mobility is the most interesting part of the Steam Deck, because as soon as you're strapping yourself to a wall, why aren't you using something else? Like, why aren't you playing on a laptop? Why aren't you, I don't know. There's a lot of things. Point. So, as soon as you start doing that, then I think the mobility question goes out the window. And the type of games I would play on the Steam Deck aren't like Returnal, which you showed in your video, Rich, where it's like, we know that's a troublesome game.
Yeah. That doesn't even run on the 7840U.
Yeah, so I'm not so upset about those things, and the only thing that I'm a little tiny bit upset about is the lack of VRR, and that would be the one thing where I would say maybe I'll just wait for Steam Deck Mark III, unless that's a software thing they can sort out over time. Given the new screen, who knows? I can't say anything there. But I think that's the only thing that I really love in the ROG Ally, right? That's got VRR. And the reason why is because it's going to be a bit different now with the new frame rate limiter. Because earlier, when you would have a V-synced frame at you'd be limiting game to 40 FPS, which I think is reasonable, you'd have... when the FPS would dip even just a tiny bit, the frame time would get a little bit too long. Then you'd have the equivalent stutter hiccup of what would be a 20 FPS stutter almost, if you think about it. And it's ooh, you can feel that way more.
It's bad, yeah.
Than you can feel a VRR drop. You wouldn't even see the VRR drop most likely. So VRR is a game changer, I think, in a lot of ways. And that's the only thing about this new device where I go man, that's the holy grail of the Steam Deck at this point. But the rest of the package is so sick. So for me, I would say if you are interested in these devices, really think about how you want to play your games and what games you want to play. If you're fine with just playing older titles or indie games, then the Steam Deck is for you. If you want to do more powerful stuff and are worried about a judder from VSync, then really go for the other devices.
Mm-hmm. That seems fair enough. Your thoughts, John?
Actually, thinking about the screen in general, I wanted to ask earlier, do we know if Special K is available for Linux and if it works on the Steam Deck?
I don't know.
I asked that because considering the state of HDR on PC, there's a lot of games that either don't support HDR or have bad HDR. And I find that Special K is kind of a requirement for PC games these days in terms of taking advantage of HDR. So that would actually be something I'd be curious to see. But yeah, I mean, you know, the main thing about the Steam Deck for me when looking at all these questions here, it just comes down to the fact that it's kind of built to play more like a console, if you will. Yeah. Right. And you kind of lose that. Windows is not a great experience currently on those machines. I mean, I understand that Microsoft has an intention to improve this, but I don't think it's there yet. Right? Didn't Phil Spencer call the ROG Ally an Xbox?
Yes, he did. He did.
Which I think is
anything Xbox on the go.
Yeah, I mean, anything at this point could be an Xbox apart from a PlayStation, really, and a Switch, conceivably. Yeah, I mean, I don't really like that. That sort of.
No.
It doesn't feel right to me.
I don't agree with it anyway. I mean, that it can run Xbox services, but I wouldn't consider it an Xbox. Yeah, but I understand what they're trying to say there with that. But yeah, I mean, for me, like I said, something like the ROG Ally just isn't that appealing. Like, despite the hardware, it really is just, it just feels like cramming too many PC components into this little portable thing versus Valve really seems to have spent a lot of time making an experience as streamlined as possible, which is what you want on a mobile device usually.
Deck sleep is awesome.
I don't actually like fiddling with mobile devices that much. It just feels less convenient and it's more annoying and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well,
right.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the issue, right? Is that Steam Deck is a great piece of hardware, but it's not just hardware. I mean, they've basically created a mobile ecosystem that's Steam compatible, and that is not to be taken lightly. And basically when you have these Windows handhelds, I have yet to find one where I haven't had to plug in a keyboard and mouse in order to set things up like you would with a PC, you know, go to the Windows desktop and set things up there. There's so many things that just don't really work. And so, you know, these machines are very much for the enthusiast who want those extra performance features from the latest chipsets. But the Steam Deck is just like, you know, a really good product for the mainstream. But at the same time, you know, with stuff like the frame rate caps and the various other options there in that performance sidebar, there's enough of, you know, the tweakability that you want from a PC as well. I think it's just a really fantastic device. And yeah, I mean, it is basically, if you want to play the latest and greatest games going forward, you're going to require a different device. But the thing about, you know, and I said this in my review, the thing about the Steam Deck OLED is that the quality of that screen just makes you want to go back and revisit your existing library. I mean, you know, Arkham Knight was my first go-to game, and it just looks really terrific on that screen. There's another interesting discussion point that's come up. The release date of the Steam Deck original was 25th of February 2023. We're looking at 2022. We're looking at November 16th, 2023 for the Steam Deck OLED. And some people who bought the Steam Deck are feeling a bit aggrieved that this massive upgrade has come relatively soon. And I guess it is an interesting argument to have, because if this happened in the console space, you know, basically 20 months later, a significantly better revised console came along, you might feel a bit upset. But I'm curious what you guys think about this, because obviously I could accept that on, you know, from the console perspective, but 20 months in the PC space is something quite different in terms of the pace of technological innovation. Alex, what do you think?
I don't feel this way at all. And if I had bought one, I would have known kind of like, there's always any single thing that is in the PC environment. Every single time you buy something, it's immediately out of date. It's immediately out of date. Isn't.
Not a 4090.
Well, I mean, 4090 FE. You could drop some water on that. You could do some crazy stuff. It's always not the best.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay,
it's always
not
saying. The best, unless you're a hardcore tweaker.
Yeah, I literally thought you were going to drop some water on it.
I love that term. That's amazing.
Then it would be obsolete because it would no longer work anymore.
Yeah, really big paperweight. But there's just with that cycle of things, and like you're not always going to have the best. Like just kind of be happy with what you have, kind of thing. And it is the first gen product. Of a company who does do iterations, or either they do iterations or they just drop it completely. I would say in this case, I was really expecting them to do this, and they kind of said it in that one interview. I forget when that was. They said, we're going to do more iterative things. And I felt like this was what the hint was, an iterative Steam Deck. So I wasn't too surprised, other than I think maybe the HDR surprised me. I didn't expect an HDR screen. OLED seemed like the right way to go, but HDR is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Something I didn't mention in my review, but is really, really cool, is that you can bring up HDR scopes and get an idea of the
that's cool.
The sort of peak brightness and everything in any given screen. It's like a real-time monitor. Typically, you'd have to, the way we'd do that in the past to ascertain, the dynamic range of any given game is capture some footage, take it into DaVinci Resolve, and you'll see those pretty much those exact same scopes that you get with the Steam Deck there. It's really an interesting, nice feature. We did get a briefing from Valve, by the way. That was like end of October. Obviously this did come out of nowhere, and I've had some messages asking, well, when did you find out about this? And did you see it at Gamescom? The answer was no.
No.
October 31st. That was when I got my briefing. And, it's just amazing that this just kind of came out of nowhere. Some stuff that did come out from the interview, though, that we did. They just wanted to keep the same power sort of performance target, just because they want to establish this as a platform. I'm sure they could have got more out of this chip, right? They probably could have increased clocks. They probably could have made various tweaks to get a bit more performance. As it turns out, you do get more performance. And I think it's a combination of the fact that a more efficient chip is operating with the same peak power ceiling. And secondly, you've just got much faster RAM, which basically is like manna from heaven to an AMD APU. I did some performance tests in the review there. And it was actually more exaggerated than the Valve guys kind of let me believe in the interview, but it really does depend on the use case, right? Because it seems to be the case that, well, there's always a battle going on with an APU between, what resource should I give to the CPU? What resources should I give to the GPU? It's kind of a balancing act that's always happening in there. And basically, I believe it's the additional power to performance ratio from the new chip, plus the new memory that's combining to do these improvements. One thing I did show in the video, which I didn't show all of the sequence, but A Plague Tale Requiem, I mean, that rat deluge sequence in the dungeon at the end of the second act is a classic scene, right? But I guess we could actually show the full clip now. Yeah. What we actually see, I think, is that kind of battle between CPU and GPU resources. There's enormous stutter on the old deck, and there's still a lot of stutter on the new one, right? But it's significantly reduced. And when you look at the frame rate differentials there and the frame time graph, it's quite phenomenal to see just how much better the new one is. And I think this is just kind of like an extreme load situation there, but it's it's pretty big stuff. I'd like also to talk about the Eurogamer interview, where basically Valve are saying that the technology doesn't exist yet to create a Steam Deck 2, which I find quite interesting. Valve has always kind of shied away from producing iterative upgrades for the APU, right? Because, you've seen what happens with those APUs in those other handhelds. You get that extra performance, but it tanks battery life. These are bigger chips, right? They have more compute units, they have more CPU cores, and they require more power to operate, even at a decent level, your base level performance. It just requires more power. And 30 to 50% more performance for doubling power. I just don't think that's a viable upgrade path for a Steam Deck. So I reckon if they can double performance at the same power budget, you've probably got a viable Steam Deck 2, right? But, we're just not seeing that from these chips at the moment. And we've gone through 6 nanometer. We've gone through 4 nanometer with the Z1 Extreme. We're still not there. So, I think Steam Deck 2 is years off.
Yeah, it'll have to be at that point if they don't think even those things are enough. So,
yeah, I mean, the reduced CPU core count in Steam Deck, the reduced compute unit count, it's simply because they get the best balance of efficiency and performance with a reduced amount of components compared to these chips that are being used in the handhelds, which are effectively designed for laptops, right? That's the bottom line. But yeah, I mean, what can I say? It's been a really interesting project to actually, do this. It's just been a lot of fun.
One other thing to tack on, and I mentioned this on socials yesterday, is one of the benefits of the OLED screen is that it solves the problem with the 16:10 aspect ratio.
Yes.
So a lot of PC games don't support 16:10, weirdly enough. And on the original deck, you just get the obvious glowing backlight borders on the screen. Whereas with an OLED screen, it basically just fades away and it looks like it's part of the bezel, right? Which maybe it's a small thing, but for me, it actually does make a big difference in terms of just the aesthetic of playing that device. So
for sure,
another benefit of that technology.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what can I say? I think this is a really good product. I really enjoyed using it. It just looks phenomenal. But yeah, check out my review and others because, it seems it's a bit of a universally positive reception there. But I guess that's all we've really got to say about that at the moment. So let's move on to the next news topic. Well, I call this one a news topic. It's more of an announcement of an announcement. Rockstar has confirmed that early in December, which, isn't so far away, we're going to be seeing the reveal trailer for Grand Theft Auto 6. I was sort of in two minds as to whether to even discuss this in DF Direct Weekly because,
right.
What have we got to go on? What value can we add to this particular discussion? However, supporters have got a lot of questions, right? And it's, I guess, one thing that is fun is, the kind of expectation management and wish fulfillment balance that people want. But I just think we should plow on into these questions and see what's what. This one from Ricardo Rackhouse. With the recent announcement of GTA6, do you think Rockstar will focus more on RT features? Do you think that this time the PC will not be neglected like it is in GTA 5 and will have better RT features? Well, we saw ray traced reflections added to the console versions of GTA 5, right? Yeah, I believe there were shadows as well. Yeah. So it's pretty, it's nice, but sort of minimalistic. It's not like a Alan Wake 2 PC or anything like that. But Alex, what do you think of this? They've experimented with RT features. It would be odd if they weren't in the new game.
It would be pretty weird, but if you think about it, like control on console with Xbox Series X and PS5 launched with ray traced reflections. But for the release of Alan Wake 2, same engine, iterative upgrade over it, but with some big differences, obviously didn't include ray tracing of the hardware variety on consoles. So I would say it would make a lot of sense, but if they are, for them to have RT, for example, on the consoles and maybe eventually in a PC version, but if they are focusing on using that current GPU power elsewhere, maybe to, like really pump up like the sky simulation like we saw like in Red Dead Redemption 2, or do some other things, because I don't think it's just going to be the same graphical package like we saw in our Red Dead Redemption 2. It's probably going to have a lot of really interesting upgrades over it. Then maybe they won't actually be focusing core on RT, or at least for the initial launch, and maybe it'll be coming in later. It's really hard to know with them because they're such a secretive studio, like to the level of just like I just saw a comment the other day, like Rockstar is one of the few anything in the games industry where they can just announce something and everyone pays attention to it regardless. Like most other You catch a shadow drop stuff usually. Like you usually don't get away with that, but for some reason Rockstar gets away with all the way they act. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see. I don't want to be too speculative here. Since they did have it in GTA 5, but that was a game with like a very different load balance. Like it was already a last gen game and they put RT on top of that. So there was enough CPU and GPU to do that. I don't know if they'll do the same for a game that has much higher requirements as a base.
Yeah, fair enough. This question from 1040 STF. Hi, folks. What do you expect on a tech level from GTA6? Do you think Rockstar has to push some boundaries on tech and/or on gameplay levels? Thoughts on this one, John? I mean, you'd expect to see, a much higher level of simulation in the city for starters.
Yeah, I mean, this is always tough to say, but given their track record, when you look at the leap from GTA 5 to Red Dead 2, it was pretty significant, and they placed a huge premium on world simulation in Red Dead 2, and GTA 5 honestly was already pretty amazing in that regard, especially considering the target hardware was a PS3 and a 360, right? So I do expect that, actually, and I hope for it, actually. I think that's one of the key areas where they could really innovate. Once again, they've always been about that, pushing interesting physics ideas. It's hard to say what specifically they might do in this game until we actually see more from it. But I'm hopeful that we will see some improvements and changes there. I'm also curious to know if they'll. Well, I guess we actually kind of know because of the leak that there's at least multiple characters again, right? Mm-hmm. So I suspect we'll see stuff from that as well. And maybe they'll take the more Spider-Man approach this time and be able to allow instant switching between characters. That could actually conceivably mix up missions as well, because you'd be able to very rapidly switch between the different characters in real time now. I mean, they already did a pretty good job with that in GTA 5, I would say.
Yeah, on like 360,
Yeah,
already
for
super
sure.
Impressive for that.
But they could do it almost instantaneously now. And looking at the last question with ray tracing, I kind of expect that we won't see it in the console versions. And I also don't think we'll see a PC version for like a year or two.
Yeah.
Because it's Rockstar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm just really hoping to see just a better fidelity city, right? Better physics, better interactions, and to actually make it worthwhile in terms of the narrative, to actually see those systems put to use. I think part of the appeal of GTA is basically not just the story. It's just the fact that you can just do anything you want at any time and just experiment with those systems. And I'd hope to see the same, but more in the new game.
That's the thing. And that's what separates GTA from other games. Like I traditionally don't enjoy what people refer to as sandbox games, because I don't believe that they actually provide an engaging sandbox experience. For that to work, the game needs to push back against the players' behaviors in interesting ways. And that's where Rockstar has always excelled, right? When you do something in a Rockstar game, you're often treated with an unexpected or impressive even sort of reaction from the game. Mm-hmm. It meets you halfway. And that is so key. And I think that's where they have a lot of room to innovate, especially given their extremely long timetables for development here.
And infinite money.
And infinite money, effectively. Yeah. So when you look at it like that, that's kind of, we don't know what this is going to look like, because we haven't seen Rockstar attempt a city-based game like this since the PS3 era, because Red Dead, for everything it's doing, it's still fundamentally not like an urban-based game, right? There are cities, but it's nothing like Grand Theft Auto. And with GTA 5 still being rooted on PS3 era hardware, there's a lot that could happen here. And that is actually genuinely exciting to see.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. That kind of answers the question from Paul Calamata as well, who's basically reminding us that the last GTA game was built for the triple. Which, obviously on Twitter this week, everyone's been posting the pictures of themselves when GTA 5 came out, and then now when the GTA 6 trailer is coming out.
That's when I moved to Europe. So.
Yeah, just astonishing stuff. Interesting question here from Uncle Mo. Hi DF crew, exclamation point. Now that we know the GTA 6 trailer will be revealed early next month, I'm preemptively dreading the likely scenario of Rockstar staying silent of the existence of a PC version, as they usually do. However, with the massive success and revenue of GTA Online, do you think Rockstar and/or Take-Two may consider a simultaneous console and PC release for a change? The PC version of GTA 5 was likely in production long before GTA became the money-making machine that it is today. Perhaps this time around they may want to take advantage of the potential shark card sales by offering the game on more platforms early on. Thoughts? Alex, I mean, well, you know, if we're sort of in the glass half full territory, it's going to come like a year later. Might be better.
Yeah, that's the glass half full. I'm going to be super cynical. No, I just think that what they could do is, they could take longer with it, just because GTAO has yet to show that it is slowing down. They didn't bring out any of the next gen upgrades there, and they didn't seem to do anything. I mean, the game had like super poor loading for an eternity until a modder kind of shamed them into making it run better. So I don't think they've really shown that that like at least whatever the bean counting is doing is I think the developers themselves are a completely different thing. But like whatever the publishing arm is saying is very radically different. And I think they would actually probably want to extract as much money for as long as possible to hold people playing different games, because then they assume like, oh, then when it eventually comes out, maybe they can have them like, you know, like playing two games at once. They could be playing it on PS5 and they go back to the old GTAO on PC with their friends, and, you know, they buy the game twice. Maybe they'll buy it 3 times if we put it out for Switch 2. You know, like these are all things that are definitely probably going through their minds. So I'm just going to say, like, just don't expect a PC version, and then be happy if you get one. Like, that's, yeah.
Yep.
It's Rockstar.
Actually, the thing about Rockstar is they're very, you know, I almost say precious with their releases, right? And I actually wonder if there's this sense that they want this console version, which can't be modded, to be the way people experience GTA first. They know the modding community's all over the series, right? And as soon as this arrives on PC, there's going to be mods everywhere. And I almost feel like they don't want that, right? Mm-hmm. Like they want the initial experience of GTA to be free of any of that. I don't know if that attitude is genuinely accurate, but it sure feels that way, doesn't it?
I know it should be
like, right? You know what I mean? Like they want you buy this version. Besides, they've actually had so much success with this tiered or like this staggered release schedule, right? Like for better or for worse, it sucks, but that's how it is, right? You release it first on one platform, and then it's so big they could see, all right, now it's coming to PC, big hype cycle again, and then after that, who knows? Maybe they're like, now it's coming to the new Switch, maybe,
like,
and then it's like, now there's a PS6 and Xbox.
You gotta get that cross-gen version in there, yeah.
Well, PS5 Pro, but then again, they didn't do an update for PS4 Pro for GTA
No, they
5.
didn't.
No, they did not. Wait, sorry, that's true. They
didn't know.
That's wild, yeah, because they did the PS5 version, but they didn't do. All right,
4 Pro. No, they didn't.
Why not?
Who knows? Better things to do, possibly. Final question from Esteban Artavia. With GTA 6 in development for so long and Take-Two probably eager to sell hundreds of millions of copies as usual, could we possibly end up with a cross-gen GTA 6? Maybe even patch later to do an improved version, or is the current gen market big enough to ignore last gen entirely, despite probably accounting for tens of millions of sales for them? God, I hope it's not it's not cross-gen. It would just, I think, you know, the one thing about GTA games is that they sell forever, right? Which, you know, you kind of think that targeting the current generation would just fundamentally make more sense because, you know, rather than looking back, they're looking forward. And they're looking at a rollout of a new GTA Online. And, you know, I don't know what the split is on, you know, titles like, you know, Resident Evil 4 that go back and produce a PlayStation 4 version, but I don't think it's you know, statistically that relevant at the moment to justify holding back the game.
This is Rockstar. They don't need to do that, right? People will come to GTA.
Yeah, that is a great way to put it, John.
Right?
They will come.
Yeah.
They certainly will. I actually misread this question at first, though, and thought he was talking about next-gen, cross-gen.
Yeah, I read that too. I was like, is this going to be a PS6 game? Like,
and I actually think it will be. It will
absolutely.
be.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think that there wasn't a GTA game built for the PS4 and Xbox One.
That's pretty funny, actually. My gosh. They went from releasing like a bunch during the PS2 generation.
Yeah, 3 big games PS2, and then 2 games during the next gen, then 0 games. And it just shows how much more complex they've become to develop, of course. Mm-hmm. But I'm actually also excited to see this trailer stylistically, to see what they do with it, because they always have excellent trailers. Mm-hmm. I mean, regardless of how you feel about GTA 4, the original Koyaanisqatsi reveal trailer was insanely good, I thought. Having the Philip Glass music timed to it with all those like shots. They said so much, like it set the tone, but it was also showing, hey, now we have real-time dynamic shadows and doing all these like shots, like recreating the feeling of that film, but using Grand Theft Auto assets, and it was phenomenal.
It's smart. Yeah.
Very, very well done. And I'm hoping for the same here.
We'll be all over that trailer when we see it, but for now, this has just been an entire exercise in basically not knowing anything that's going on, which is always fun. But I think with that, we should move on to the next news topic. Okay, so really interesting things happening with the PlayStation 5 Slim. By interesting, I mean that it is available in the US and I think Japan now. I think Alex O'Neill posted a picture of,
it might be
the unit in Japan.
It's out now,
unless he got it in America, but who knows. It's quite interesting because in the US it's being bundled with Modern Warfare 3. There's a special MW3 bundle, but in the UK, and I suspect in Europe, that same bundle uses the existing 1200 series PlayStation 5. It's not the new Slim model. So we haven't actually seen it yet. Sony UK on radio silence, which is great. And we have seen some teardowns, though. Linus did one, and Dave2D did a really, really good one. I was quite impressed with that, which basically answers all of the questions. You know, he tore the whole thing down. We took a look at the system at the motherboard level. It is confirmed now that it is using the same 6nm processor as the 1200 series, right? So there's no real changes to the in terms of efficiency or power draw. It's just a cost-reduced, size-reduced version of the existing model. I don't really know what more to say about that. Obviously, there's more I/O there in terms of USBs and whatnot. The stand situation remains ludicrous. Those little sort of Perspex inserts to make it go horizontal, or $30 to buy. Basically a bit of plastic that probably cost them a dollar.
Honestly, to me, that gets to the heart of this design. And when you actually see this thing torn apart with the covers off and everything, you realize it is actually very slim now. Indeed. I know they want to continue this brand synergy, but they've completely altered the designs of their consoles before.
Yeah.
And I really wish they had gone for something that was less weirdly shaped. Right. I don't think they needed to do that for this machine. Like with where they're at now in terms of like the thickness, they could have done a more traditional looking box. They know people don't like the way this thing looks, even though it's still selling. I will say that the size is definitely appealing in a sense, because the original PS5 remains a gigantic beast. Mm-hmm. And, even though it shares that same original design, it is the size, the reduction in size is awesome.
Well, some people have been saying that the design makes it look like one of those cheap knockoff consoles that you see on AliExpress.
Actually, and part of that's because of those awful, the shiny top plates. Because they have matte plates on the bottom and shiny plates on top. Why would you mix plastics like that?
They did it on the PS4, the original one, of course.
Also stupid.
But that was a better integrated design. It doesn't have that cheap AliExpress look to it. And this really does. And I think actually that what contributes to it is the center part, the black part of the unit down the middle. It's so shiny in a way that does make it look like that AliExpress style plastic. So I don't know, man. It's a weird design.
It doesn't make me think this is like a state of the art console.
But seriously, when you see this without the covers on. Like if you look here at this photo in our chat here, you know, he's got it side by side next to the original PS5. It's really freaking slim without those covers.
Why does it have that?
Without the covers, yeah.
They could have done something more with the design to just make it, I don't know, sit in the entertainment system. The fact that they need these little tiny legs to sit horizontally is mind-blowing to me. Like, I just don't, yeah, it's wild.
There was some... There was some further confirmation of the internals there. They are not using a standard SSD on the internal drive. It's just a reconfiguration, a reduced amount of higher capacity NAND modules to get that 1 terabyte of storage, which I think is, it's welcome. More storage is always good, right? And yes, the M2 slot definitely is there now, so you can still add in an internal drive, right. And there's no loss of functionality there. And there's been some talk that the acoustics are maybe slightly better. I mean, I think that's one of the big triumphs of this generation for all of the platform holders, is that these consoles are no longer, loud. I mean, Microsoft had it pretty much sorted last gen, but Sony definitely did not. And it's great to see an emphasis on the fact that these things actually do need to be quiet. They've also retained the liquid metal thermal interface, which I thought was quite interesting. I was expecting that to go, but it's still there.
Leak out, baby.
do you remember that movie where it will leak out?
Oh, yeah.
And destroy your console. As if, Sony wouldn't have anticipated that.
The liquid metal's coming out of the machine. It's going to destroy everything.
Yeah. I mean, I do still want to take a look at this, but I do suspect that any coverage we do will probably be too little or too late, or too much too late, depending on how we look at it. I do think there are some interesting things to look at in terms of, I don't know, just a sort of overview and power consumption. A closer look at that. But I think it would all still apply to the 1200 series PlayStation 5 as well, which never really got the attention it deserved. The 1100 series, obviously there was that huge sort of Austin Evans video that caused a lot of panic. And there was coverage from Gamers Nexus and whatnot that helped to alleviate some of that panic. But the 1200 series just seemed to appear and nobody really paid it too much attention, even though you did get an actual die shrink. But yeah, I mean, basically, it's that PlayStation 5. What do you want?
The 12 series seems like a great one to get to purchase and hold on to, because it is the die shrink, but it's also doesn't have the limitations of this add-on disk drive, which requires a server to even be activated. So if you had a spare 1200 back there with the disk drive, it's a good feature machine.
I still think that the concept of being able to upgrade your digital edition is good.
I 100% agree. I think the idea is awesome. It's just the fact that you can't buy one. It now needs to be activated online to use it.
It seems,
which is the same problem that Xbox has, and we've been wanting them to fix that. And now Sony's like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And so now both consoles have that same DRM problem.
Yeah. I mean, if there's anything people want to know about the new PlayStation 5, I could import one. It cost a fortune, but we could take a look at it. We've got the PlayStation Portal coming up soon. Again, no sign of that from Sony at the moment, although I understand the US media have been seeded review samples.
Yeah, they have it for sure.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious about that. But I think in terms of that particular product, I still think it needed something a bit more than remote play. I don't know whether it's still just remote play or whether there's some sort of custom solution they've integrated, but I guess we're going to find out soon.
Yeah, as a later topic we'll get to, my opinion on in-home streaming has been revised a little bit. We'll get to that.
There's been a lot of 180 U-turns for you recently with this sort of thing, John. I think we should talk about this a bit more when we get to the appropriate topic.
Yeah. We'll get there.
But for now, let's move on to the next news topic. Okay, so this one, well, what can I say, Alex? For a while now, you've been using the Core i9 12900K for your high-end PC game reviews. And I think it was at Gamescom where we met with AMD and we said to them, come on, guys, if you've got the 7800X3D, and it's the fastest gaming chip out there. Why don't you slide one in Alex's direction?
Go on, lads.
Yeah,
Go on, lads.
I remember sitting at the table. I look over at Frank Azor. I'm like, Frank. Yeah, that was pretty great. And this, yes,
and they've come through.
And they've come through. They're AMD. They put they do everything they need to do. They're great people at AMD when it comes to these kinds of things. So yes, AMD sent over to me a 7800X 3D. So the latest and greatest from them for gaming performance. Obviously, if you were going for productivity workloads, you look at a different Ryzen.
Yeah, they love 3D, by the way, in their CPUs. There was 3D Now, which I mentioned recently, and now there's this.
Yeah, but I don't even think anything supports 3D Now anymore, which is really funny.
It's dead.
It's dead. It's dead.
3D Now is dead.
And the main board that they also sent with it too was, which is also very kind. Now you don't expect to get a main board if you're supplied any sort of sample at all. Is the Gigabyte Aorus? How do you pronounce that? Aorus? X670E Master. And for this board, this is funny. I posted that online with the picture of it, and people are like, "Oh no, not that board." So I'll figure this out over time if there is an "Oh no, not that board" kind of thing. But setting it up was pretty easy. If you go back in time, there's a video I did of, what was it? Flight Simulator 2020, where I showed off the rig sent to me by Origin, which is this cool water loop rig using a Corsair water cooler and loop in it. Really great. That was serving the 10900K then. Then I changed out the heatsink and I put in a 12900K in it. And for this, for the Ryzen 7800X 3D, all I had to do was take out the heatsink, put on a different bracket on it, which already came in the box for it, the heatsink, by the way, and I then just slid it over it. It's so easy to change. I didn't have no problems at all installing this thing. Putting it in the case, a little bit tight there. That's just because new motherboards have these massive heat sinks that connect to the IO on the back. That's one thing that has changed over time, is just how much more monolithic boards are. There's less visible capacitors and less more space for your fingers and hands to work with it when you put it in the case. You have to do everything outside of the case now. It's very different. So I plugged it in, installed it. I didn't have any memory training issues at all. Mostly went in all fine. The only issue that I had, and I've had this before with other boards too, is that they don't like outputting to HDMI always initially. They prefer things like DisplayPort to output initially too. And I don't know what exactly that is, if that's a GPU thing or if that's a board thing. It's really hard to know. I didn't want to test any theories there. I just wanted to get the board up and running. So I got it up and running, threw it in stock, updated the BIOS, turned on DOCP. Is it right? It's not called... Is it DOCP?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's basically the version of XMB for AMD, right?
Yeah.
Overhead cam,
something like that. I don't know. But that was, and I used the exact same memory that was powering the 12900K system, which is 6400 MTS CL32, good memory, G-Skill, and I like it a lot. And I was curious about what does this actually mean, because you go underneath all the comments of my videos, people are like, whenever I cover any sort of game that has problematic things like stuttering or CPU related issues, there's always a comment saying but Alex is using a 2-gen old CPU. Is this a reliable review? I'm not seeing any of this on my CPU, which is better than Alex's CPU. All right. So I've got the best CPU on the market now.
Well, Alex, what could I say? Basically a 2-year-old CPU just can't, it just doesn't cut the mustard. Obviously.
It just doesn't anymore.
When you're dealing with anything up to a 200 millisecond pause.
Yeah, it's all on the CPU.
A CPU that's 2 years younger, that's the state of the art. That's just going to go away, right?
It's all on the CPU there, definitely. So if you guys look at it, I also dropped a video of all the little benches I did. I did some benches, and these are nothing like your Gamers Nexus style benches or anything like that. This is stock for both of these systems. I'm not doing PBO shenanigans. I am using I typed that online today because I was curious to see what people doing about that.
PBO shenanigans.
This is just all mostly stock with the memory put up to the way it should be. I disabled the iGPU as well on both systems. I don't think that has any effect on anything. But these are mainly all the same settings. There's one thing that is slightly different settings, but we'll get to there, and there's a reason why. Okay, so first I start off with Crysis. Can it run Crysis? So one thing I noticed when I was playing the game on the 1200K originally is that you can definitely still get drops below 60 when you get near the town. And as you can see in this video right here, it's just like cruising along 55, 56 while looking over the town. Guess what? Not below 60 on the 7800 X3D. It's about like 15% faster here overlooking the town. And the thing with the X3D chips that you have to like kind of, when you get one of these, you have to like assume like not every game is going to benefit massively from this increased cache to the same degree. It really depends on it's a game per game basis. Otherwise you're looking at other factors like memory speed. If you have one of those X3D chips that has 2 CCXs, this one doesn't. Maybe you're like looking at like, do I disable one of the CCXs for this? There's a lot of things that influence the performance of a game, but Crysis, just like 15%. Nothing too impressive, but it's also a nice upgrade. After that, I actually tried out something that I was really curious about, and that was running Killzone 2 in RPCS3. So RPCS3 is interesting because I think Dolphin does down too, but they support AVX 512. And most recent Intel chips, 13900K, 14900K, don't out of the box support it. The 12900K I had actually did if you disabled the E-cores. So this is a AVX 512 test of both of these CPUs. And the funny thing is, if you look at it, they perform the exact same, which surprised me. And then I had to go up online. I was like, really? And a lot of people are saying, actually, this RPCS3, in spite of it supporting AVX 512, is a bit more Intel friendly for some reason. And it may also be a per game basis thing there. But one thing you'll see on the top is I had to use a different scheduler. I had to use the RPCS3 scheduler versus the system scheduler, because whenever I used the RPCS3 scheduler on the 7800 X3D, it brought in nasty stuttering and audio stuttering, which I don't know why. So I had to change the scheduler, but it ran the exact same. So far I'm like, this isn't that actually so super interesting of a CPU upgrade. But now I'm going to skip ahead to something that I think was like, I understand the 3D cache deal. Loaded up Star Citizen's Alpha. It's like 3.21 that just recently released, I believe. And that is notorious as you're looking over Lorville here, like it's just going to destroy your CPU. And I've read online that this game does not like the latest Core series processors and really loves AMD stuff. And that is exactly what I measured. Now, forgive the time of day differences here. I swear I'm looking at the exact same thing. It's just like you load up a server and the time of day is different. You can't do anything about it. But here, I saw 30%, roughly 29%, actually, it was a little bit over 29% difference in performance and a lot less stuttering while running. And the servers were running at the exact same performance too here. 30% for just popping in like a different, different board, different CPU, of course, but like the exact same memory. And I think that is a huge difference. I didn't see nearly always the same upgrades when I went 10900K to 1200K. It was, so that was one of those things that I really loved seeing. A huge upgrade there in performance. Obviously, this game is still DX11, so it's going to run better in the future, I hope. And just to be a joker, because all those comments, I'm like, Alex, you're talking about shader stutter in this game. I don't see any shader stutter. What are you talking about? I'm running a 7800 X3D. Well, I loaded up one of the most consistent shader stutters that I know of, and it's like you open up Ghost Runner or the demo to Ghost Runner 1, and you start the game, the headset starts up, there's immediately stuttering, you drop down, you katana the first dude to death, huge stutter when you do all that. The thing you'll notice here is I'm running VSync because I want those stutters to show up a bit better and like look visually very distracting. So what you'll see is that the stutters are the exact same, more or less, between the 12900K and the 7800X 3D. So that means, once again, like I've said and posited in all my videos, regardless of how good your CPU is, you're still going to see shader comp stutters. And interestingly here, you can see that the length is more or less the exact same too. So it wasn't a big difference. The cache isn't really helping against shader stutters, reducing their length. But when it's not shader stuttering, notice how the performance is a big deal better. It's 20% basically. Still below the VSync cap there at 4K 120. So basically, doesn't help with shader stutters. Okay, what about traversal stutters? I loaded up Jedi Survivor, a game that I do not like at all. And I loaded... No yeah, it's not like, like you watch my videos, you definitely think this is my favorite game that released this year. On average, higher 15% performance when you see them running side by side. And you can see it in the average frame rate numbers. But if you look at the frame time graph, more or less all the stutters are there. And this is a combination of shader compilation stutters and as the usual traversal stutters when you just run through the Kobo area. And they're not of that much of a different length at all. So the thing that I kind of take away from this and Ghost Runner is that really it doesn't matter how good your CPU is. Shader compilation stutters are still there. You're going to have to wait for much higher CPU speeds and IPC performance to see larger differences over time. So we're talking about like 5-10 years from now to actually see these big differences.
The solution needs to be on the software side.
Yeah, obviously. Exactly. You can't solve these things. Another game that I was really interested in was Baldur's Gate 3, the third chapter in it. And I wanted to highlight something that I saw here and as well as in Cyberpunk, where as you see this benchmark start out, and I'm running through what is the heaviest area of this like Rivington Baldur's Gate opening area. The lines are a lot closer than you would maybe think, given the overall performance difference that I measured through the average of this benchmark here, which was 15% in favor of the 7800X 3D, which is great. But at the beginning, it's a lot closer. But as like the heaviest area, you move away from the heaviest area, the lines start spreading apart a lot more. And the bigger difference, actually, in terms of raw FPS, happens later on. That's a bit of a percentage wonkiness there, but also the difference in terms of milliseconds is also growing towards the end of this benchmark, which I think is very interesting. And it shows that whatever the thing that is limiting performance, it is more similar across these CPUs than it is later on in the bench when that thing, whatever it is not limiting performance. And I saw the exact same thing in Cyberpunk 2077. Running that bench through, the heaviest areas of the bench had more similar performance than the areas where they're just like cruising along the highway, for example. And when we see those bars split apart again, the lines split apart on the frame time graph and as well on the frame rate graph. And Cyberpunk 2077, once again, around a 14% performance uplift versus the 12900K I added in there. I guess my overall experience here with it is only positive, zero negative aspects to loading up the 7800X 3D. It was not like a terror or anything like that. It was actually a super easy install. Loved it. I really do like now that there aren't any pins on the processor itself. So good, way different than my AMD experiences of the past. I really, really loved that. In terms of performance over the 12900K, it's a little bit variable, but it was pretty much always better, which is exactly what I was looking for. I think I would have seen bigger gains if I had different memory kits lying around. And for example, like I had been playing the 12900K with like a 5200 megahertz kit, or I see a lot of bench
water on it.
I don't want to drop some water on it. I definitely would have seen some differences there. Basically, I think I went into it with a good enough 12900K due to the memory setup that was already in there. And so I see less gains versus when I, throw in the X3D here. But I think this is definitely still like a super top dog CPU. And in terms of my coverage, it'll allow for more really cool coverage I now have a 4K 120 capture card. I can actually do more reliable 4K 120 capture, and
so which is show it on the channel at 120.
Yeah, all this. Yeah, we can totally do that. Thank you, YouTube. But for for our Patreon supporters. They can get 4K 120 videos from me from now on in a much more reliable fashion. If so, and all this footage that you've seen here, which you can't even tell because it's YouTube, was actually recorded at 4K 120.
Unless you run it at slow motion.
No. But yeah, I'm loving the X3D here. Better than the 12900K. I'm not using it for my workstation, but it wipes the floor. If you wanted to use it as a workstation, like you actually have PCIe lanes, you don't have to worry about any of that. Like it's like I have no idea what Intel's doing in that space. Like why they are so stingy with those PCIe lanes, man. It's so dumb.
It's annoying, yeah. I mean, the fact that you're still seeing the stutters there, Alex. I mean, yes. It is a debunking of yet another of the runs fine on my PC memes.
It is
that we have. There's a lot of them that there's kind of like perceived internet wisdom, which you just apply the basic rules of common sense to it. It just makes no sense whatsoever. Basically, if you've got like let's say you've got a 150 millisecond stutter on a 12900K. What is a shader compilation stutter doing? It's compiling a shader. It's an entirely CPU based task. So the size of that stutter is going to be essentially related to your clock speed and the capabilities of the architecture. But the point is, it's not going to go away. Right?
No.
It's not going to. You're not going to get a stutter-free experience just because you've bought this particular CPU. The other one, which I find really funny, which comes up a lot, is the fact that FSR might present differently on an NVIDIA GPU than it would on an AMD one. It's a compute shader. It's maths. So unless they calculate maths differently from one architecture to another, or unless there is actually something within the source code that says, hey, this is running on an NVIDIA GPU, I'm going to do it in a different way, it's going to present the same way because it's maths. 2 plus 2 equals 4 on both an AMD and a GPU, NVIDIA GPU.
That stuff, man. We have to deal with these myths all the time when I make a video.
But I love the concept of the 7800 X3D, but I love even more the concept of the 5800 X3D, which is for the AM4 platform, which is kind of like the product that sort of laid the groundwork for this whole X3D thing. And what I love about it is the fact that AMD introduced BIOS updates for any board going all the way back to the original Ryzen 1000 launch. If you had like a 2018 class motherboard, you could just do an BIOS upgrade, buy this chip, and suddenly you're back up there with the 12900K in terms of performance. Yeah. This is possibly the best thing that ever happened in CPU terms. And the fact that they're actually now doubling down on X3D and actually putting it into the stack in their new product lineups, I think is great as well. I think this is just superb. It does kind of, the whole reason this works is basically because it's got more direct access cache, right? Which means that it has to, it can cache more. It doesn't need to call on system memory as much. But that does kind of, for every one of these games where you're seeing a 20 to 30% increase, you kind of can't help but think, well, what if that actually optimize the CPU path a bit more there, to fit within existing cache structures.
For that's one thing that I do think about sometimes. It depends. It's very game dependent, and like that's why the shader compilation starter thing is very interesting, because if you know a shader program, it's not going to be busting cache usually. They're a bit smaller unless it's like some massive Uber shader or something like that. But even then, you wouldn't be doing that in real time. Like no one would be doing JIT with that. So it makes sense. The areas where it does have the bigger upgrades tend to be those games where, like, that's why I'm not doing a Gamers Nexus here. I'm not doing a hub, like spread of benchmarks. I don't have CS:GO here, CS2 here, or Dota 2 or anything like that. Like those games where you might see these larger, huge differences. And even in here, there's a couple ones that I know, like for some reason scale really well on Intel, like Cyberpunk is just like one of those few games that actually is okay with eCores being in your system. It doesn't like tank. I didn't do Lords of the Fallen here, for example, which runs worse with eCores on. I didn't do anything like that. This is just like it happened to run that way. I think if I had a larger spread of games here, we would see a bigger difference. But that's the thing when you get one of these X3D chips. It's going to be better overall, usually, but it won't always be so mind-bendingly better. And that's the one thing that we'll just see when I do more reviews over time, how it pans out.
I think the other thing about your commentary on the various games here is that you just demonstrate how hard it is to properly review a CPU, because, you know, the CPU has so many different tasks to do within any given game, within any given time slice of any given game, that the results can vary dramatically. And the differentials between CPUs could also vary dramatically. I mean, the shader compilation thing is probably the most exaggerated point there, where, you know, it doesn't really matter how much better this CPU is, you're still going to have a crap experience with this game.
Yeah, that's the one thing here. Like, just saying the percentage numbers isn't really very valuable to anyone, in spite of this being an interesting scientific thing to go through. But like, how it's more about like which one helps you get your performance target more, and that's usually up to your monitor's refresh rate for a lot of people. And in this case, for example, like very specifically in Ghost Runner, Crysis Remastered, a little bit in Cyberpunk, and a little bit in BG3, like it is getting it closer to that 4K 120 that I could otherwise not be getting because the CPU is better. But it isn't like I'm immediately hitting the refresh rate now as a result of this new CPU. It's like, it's better, but it's not a generational difference, but it's really good.
Okay, fair enough. Interesting stuff. I'm very happy that you're happy with your 7800X3D, and look forward to seeing it in future coverage. But let's move on to our next news story. This one just made me chuckle because obviously the Switch 2 is in development. It's coming probably in 2024. But at recent investor calls or meetings, well, Nintendo basically denied everything. It denied...
Doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. It was at Gamescom. It denied Activision's testimony under oath that they'd seen the Switch 2, or they'd been briefed on the Switch 2.
That's funny.
And I just find this hilarious. I mean, it comes on the tail of mega sales numbers now confirmed for the original Switch. I think it's up to 132 million systems shipped.
But it's also on a downturn.
It is also on a downturn, but it's...
As it should be, as you'd expect.
Yeah.
So, why beat around the bush like this? I don't get it.
I suspect because, you know, we're entering the holiday period where people are going to be buying consoles.
I know, it's easier to just throw out a no comment kind of thing than this whole, like, basically saying, we've never done any of that. This thing does not exist. It is not real, which is what their statement feels like. One
thing I do think they need to be cut a bit of slack on is that they denied anything about the Nintendo patent filing for a device with multiple screens. And I think that's fair enough, right? Because most patents are just exactly that. There aren't really any firm indication that this is going to be an actual product. Right.
Yeah, where's that PlayStation McDonald's one where it's like it shows the ad and it's like, say McDonald's to skip the ad, and it's like McDonald's.
That's a famous one.
Wow.
That's a great patent.
That's amazing.
It's sadly becoming real, I think. Slowly.
I don't really know what to say about that, except to say, well, the Switch 2 definitely was showcased at Gamescom to developers. Maybe it wasn't the actual unit, right? But it was hardware development hardware or target specification hardware.
Right.
So, you know, to all intents and purposes, it was there. But I do think that there wasn't any actual reveal of the unit to developers because that's the crazy thing from my perspective, is that we still don't know what this machine actually is. Right. We know that it's going to be a new mobile device because it has to be a hybrid console like the first one, simply because of their organization structure for their first party developers. They can't go back on that. But beyond that, we know nothing about this machine. I think that's great, actually. I just like surprises in the industry. But there's not really too much more we can say about this, except, you know, as Video Games Chronicle points out, they've denied press reports in the past. And in one case, I think it was for the revised DS or 3DS, it was actually officially announced the day after the denial, which is just awesome. You know,
gosh, Nintendo doesn't mess around.
Yeah, you know, 1 day development cycle.
Yeah,
they got wind of these
dreamt
rumors
that
and
all
thought,
up.
well, this is a great idea. Let's get it out tomorrow.
Let's do that. Go on then, lads.
Go on then.
Yeah, just do it. Yeah, go on, lads.
Amazing scenes. I'm kind of curious, John, when do you think we're actually going to see the Switch 2? Obviously, when the Switch 1 came out, we had this trailer that appeared kind of in this kind of time period. But at that point, they had nothing to lose by showing it, right?
Right, right. I feel like it would make... It's hard to say with Nintendo, right? But I feel like showing it sometime in the first half of next year would make sense. And
Right.
then, I kind of was wondering if they do another early release, but I don't think that's going to happen now. So
Really?
it kind of... I mean, unless they just do a surprise drop where it's like, here it is February, and then it's going to show up in like March or April. That's not impossible, I guess, but we'll see. It's tough to say.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Don't think there's too much more we can say about this, as usual.
Indeed.
So with that, let's move on to the next news topic. So for a while now, there have been rumors that NVIDIA is going to refresh the 40 series lineup. And I think this week we saw some leaks artwork of a 4070 Ti Super. And it looks as though there's going to be a few products that are possibly going to be announced at CES 2024, which is in early January. The leaks at the moment are talking about a 4080 Super. They're talking about a 4070 Ti Super. I don't know, a Ti and a Super. It's kind of like Ghostbusters. The streams shouldn't be crossing in that way.
A Ti Super, yeah.
Yeah. It's either Ti or Super. Both is kind of like, has severe implications for the space-time continuum.
It's like putting GTX and RTX together.
Yeah, the GT RTX.
The GT RTX.
And there's going to be a 4070 Super. The specs have been leaked, and what can you say? All of them are kind of like iterative upgrades. The 4070 Super actually looks to have the biggest increase in CUDA cores, possibly 7,168 versus 5,888. Elsewhere, it's, I don't know, I guess they're all sort of small iterative upgrades. The 4080 Super.
Dude, the 4080 Super really needed to be closer to 4090, I feel.
Oh,
maybe halfway between 4080, 4090, something like with this kind of... It just doesn't feel like it's going to be a significant enough upgrade in this regard.
Well, the leak's talking about 10,240 versus 9,728. That's not that much of a difference, right?
This is 3070 Ti territory for me.
Which is
that's
fine.
what I can think of. I think the 4070 Ti Super and 4070 Super are more interesting. But it really depends on your use case. Like the 4070 Super, like it could have a lot greater shading power, and it could bring it like more in line with and above the 3090 at times. I think that's what you would get from this, like in terms of just like raw performance in a game. I think that's like what it could potentially do. But like once again, 12 gigabytes of VRAM. Again, it's great if you're at 1440p, but at 4K, not every title is going to like it to the same degree. So it really depends on what you're doing. The 4070 Ti Super gets rid of that issue. 16 gigabytes is by far enough for 4K, I would say.
I think that's the problem, though, Alex. Why does a Ti Super have to exist? There should just be one, and it should be the Ti Super, but
it should have
called the Super. I don't know.
My guess is that the Supers are going to replace the cards that are directly beneath them, right? So the 4080 Super replaces the 4080, etc., etc. And if you look at the lineup of what dies are being used, it is essentially much the same. The difference being the 4070 Ti Super, where it is actually getting the more advanced chip.
Right.
So at least it's a little bit super.
I think DF support busy tracks, puts the nail on, hammers the nail on the head. And he says, what would you all consider to be fair prices for GPUs? We all roll our eyes at a $1,200 4080, but the 3080 at $699 felt like great value. Hopefully with the Super Ti cards, this generation can become more affordable. If we go back to the last time the Super name was rolled out, it was for Turing, right? Which very similar to 40 series in many ways, in that they came out and they were expensive cards. It's like I think the 2070 was like $530, which was kind of nuts. So maybe this is the whole reason behind a refresh is to kind of rationalize the pricing. So, if you're looking at the 4080 Super and it's, on the face of it, it's not that much different to the 4080. It does seem like the only vector to make this an appealing product is to actually reduce the price. And similarly with the 4070 Ti Super, it kind of needs to be, that was originally a 4080 card, but, with a different memory allocation, but a completely different chip. And I think they're basically trying to do a bit more in that pricing bracket. Hopefully they'll reduce the price. 4070 Super, similarly, right? I mean, the 4070 is already facing stiff competition from the 7800 XT, so they've got to do something there. It's interesting to see the cards that aren't being replaced or refreshed.
Right.
4090 stays where it is, and it's still, why would you want to refresh it? I guess, it's still light years ahead of the 4080. And basically elsewhere, 4060 range remains the same. And I think there's been some organic changes to pricing there already. So I think it is all down to pricing. And this has been your number one issue with 40 series, right, Alex?
Yeah, it's just, I've said it before. I want that console and better performance at a lower price point. And it just doesn't happen here. I mean, the 4070 Super, if you're getting that for the 4070 price, I don't know, that could be interesting.
It looks like a reasonable increase in compute power, right?
Yeah, and that's really where you usually see the differences, because it's usually like trading blows with the 3080 and like falling below it at times, right? So if you could get that to be better in a lot of cases where it's just always better no matter what, it's a pretty great GPU in terms of performance. And especially since like just recently showed Alan Wake 2, like it's going to scale a lot better the more titles that we get like later down the line, just to architectural advantages. Like Alan Wake 2, 4070 base is really doing a number on the RTX 3080 there, even though like the RTX 3080 and like pure rasterization and less intense RT titles actually may be better. So that's really cool. But like, once again, it's all about this price, and I don't necessarily trust NVIDIA enough to actually reduce prices here in a meaningful way. So with regards,
I think they've got to get the price. I mean, the 4080, I mean, it's just at $1,200. It's just definition of unappealing.
Yeah, man, I don't know if I've ever seen anyone with an RTX 4080 out there. I always see people like, yeah, I got a 4090 or I've got a 4070.
I think Don's got one, hasn't he?
Oh, poor Don. Sorry, Don. Am I joking? Joking about John's rigs here? Don's rigs, yeah.
I mean, it is going to be about the pricing, in my opinion, but it does look like some interesting, albeit iterative, bumps to performance. But it's all about getting that balance of price versus performance sorted. And I mean, I guess they can make sort of just adjust pricing for the 4060s cards more organically.
Nice. More organically.
Yeah, I think,
I love the way
basically,
you describe that.
Yeah, I think it is just basically the market in that sort of lower end tier just seems to have much more leeway for price adjustments, for sale pricing, for that sort of thing. I've seen the 4060 for like $250, which, even though it's an 8 gig card, which is a bit problematic compared to the 12 gig 3060, it's worth considering, right? So, yeah, I think it's just a case of trying to sort out price versus performance on those higher end tiers. And, I guess we'll find out in January, assuming that it is a CES announcement.
Sounds about right.
Anything more to add to that? I don't know. I think it's all right. I think the one thing which is swiftly becoming the case is that I think frame generation's kind of established now. I think the latency hit is only really pronounced on the lower end kit. Only to the point where I think there's, once you're sort of getting really low latencies and maybe you're getting a 10, 15 millisecond hit, doesn't really make that much difference. I mean, you use frame gen all the time, right, John? On
Oh yeah, I just use it all the time, and it's basically not noticeable. I mean, yes, technically there can be a slight potential hit there, but for games that are demanding anyways, I feel like it just feels better with the higher perceptual frame rate versus, no frame gen and a lower frame rate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
also
think it's always worth using with VSync too. That's what I do.
There's also the idea of like consistency, and it's one thing we didn't really talk about. Like if you have since it's going to be taxing the CPU less, and you're going to have less variable, if it's a CPU heavy game, you're going to have like less variability in the raw input frame time. And you could actually get like a more consistent experience with frame gen on than with it off, even though the frame rate internally is lower. That's one thing. That's why we always talk about capping frame rates in games, why we like it, and why we advertise and say everyone should do it. And not everyone has to like that, of course, but that's one thing I think that is nice about frame gen is you get that, like, if you're like cruising at 116 FPS with frame gen on the entire time, it's great.
Yes, all right. I think it's quite ironic that we're advocating frame rate caps, which will also increase latency.
Yes, yeah, but consistency.
But nobody really says anything about it. I get exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think it's a balance, and I think just going for pure latency reduction alone at expense of everything else, maybe in select circumstances. I think that's going to be up to the user, but for me, it's just not really worth it, right? You want to get the latency to a certain level, and then everything else, you got to bring it up. Get that. It's about consistency.
Yeah, I mean, this might be a heresy to the PC audience, but the other thing is that the input lag differential generally at high frame rates with frame generation is even less noticeable with a gamepad if you're using a gamepad as an input device.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
True.
Okay. With that, let's move on to our next news story. Well, it's not really a news story, but John, you really want to talk about this, right? Because, let's be honest. Back in the day, you weren't a big fan of the Oculus Quest and all it stood for, but you've been spending a lot more time. Well, let's talk about that because you were talking about how a mobile chipset was holding back VR gaming. And, I guess that's still the case to a certain extent.
That is still the case, but So there's a couple things. First of all, things I didn't like about the Quest originally was the default strap was bad, and it felt very front heavy. And it just, the things that changed it and made it more useful for me are, one, getting lens inserts, two, getting like a more comfortable head strap that's more similar to, it's the type with like the ratchet knob in the back there you turn to tighten it. That feels a lot better on the head. And then three, the thing I finally tested this week, since I haven't had a Quest that long, and I'm also testing two headsets right now, because I do plan to do a greater VR sort of expose thing eventually here. It's interesting to look at the state of VR, and my positions have kind of moved around a bit here, but I also am testing a Pico 4 headset, which is similar to the Quest in terms of it has its own SoC, its own store, and it's a higher end one, so it's got pancake lenses like the Quest 3 does. But I've been using these both, and the big thing I discovered this week, which has been around for ages, but I never really gave it a full shot, it's wireless PC link. Basically connecting your headset to the PC and playing PC VR games that way. Mm-hmm. So my experiences with streaming in general have generally been very poor. But in this case, I'm completely blown away by how well it works within the house. Now, you need a fast router. You need to be near the router. I have my PC unwired. I'm standing in the same room as the router, which is actually downstairs where I have more space to play VR. And I tested both the Oculus Air Link feature, which is built in, and it was pretty good. But then I picked up Virtual Desktop, which is even dramatically better.
Wow.
That is really outstanding. It just produces image quality that within both headsets, it looks basically like native output. You can't tell that you're seeing a streamed video by and large. With certain colors, you can pick up some streaming artifacts. But I think just due to the nature of how close your eyes are to the screen and the way the screens work in VR like that with the lenses, it does kind of mitigate any of those issues. Mm-hmm. And so in the latency, it feels outstanding. In fact, the thing that surprised me is like the latency and image quality seemed slightly better with Virtual Desktop wirelessly than plugging the Oculus Quest 2 into your PC with a USB cable. So it's actually a better experience now.
Okay.
So yeah, with this, you can just jump into your PC. I obviously using a powerful PC, you can downsample from very high resolutions and you get this like unbelievably pristine image quality. You can run it at up to 90 hertz, I think. I know the Pico's 90. I can't remember if I have the Quest at that or not, but
I think it is 90.
Yeah, I think it's 90 as well. But both of them, even more on top of that with Virtual Desktop, they even have 3D models of the correct controllers. So when I'm using the Quest, you get the Quest 2 controllers. When I'm using the Pico 4, you get the Pico controllers. And those appear within Steam VR games correctly. So I guess, developers are implementing these different controllers into it. I mean, for VR enthusiasts, this is all old news, but man, for me, it really changed my viewpoint on PC VR because removing that wire, also for PSVR 2, really, when you remove that wire from the equation, it adds so much. You just have this level of freedom. You can walk around, you can spin in place without any issues. It means you can, like, if you're playing a first-person game now, you can essentially just rely on your own physical positioning to determine your direction, right? So when you turn corners, you don't have to think about all this cord or spinning around too much. Now the cord's all jumbled up. It just feels freaking great. Like, so it's John, really, really awesome.
What about your network setup there? Can you describe it to us so we can get a sense of what it's like?
It's not very special. I just have a reasonably fast router downstairs connected directly to where the internet pipeline comes in. I have a wired connection up to my office, and that's where the PC is connected to. So the PC pipes that in there, and I'm standing down in the living room, which is where the router is located. As long as I'm near the router, it's fantastic. I'm doing it like 100 megabits per second video stream.
That's max,
I really want to test the Quest 3 because the Quest 3 also supports AV1. If you have like a 40 series NVIDIA card, you can do AV1 encoding. Yeah, and it's actually supposedly even higher quality, which sounds amazing.
That'd be awesome. Though I've never done any AV1 really with. I don't know what performance impact that has. I haven't. The only AV1 I ever did was when I did that RTX 3090 at 8K in control video and a couple other games, and that had so many issues back then because it was just like the start of AV1 on the GPU.
It should be okay. It sounds like it's actually a better experience.
It's pretty good on 40 series, that's for sure. I just want to clarify here refresh rates. The Quest 2 does 72, 80 hertz and 90 hertz.
Okay, right.
Yeah, and the Quest 3 is 120, but I think the virtual desktop is going to be limited to 90. I might be wrong there.
So I was reading about the Quest. Somebody was saying doing 120 on the Quest 3 causes it to heat up pretty bad. It also drains the battery. Drains the battery pretty hard. So I want to test that actually. I would like to test the Quest 3 as well in all of this because I think these wireless headsets are extremely compelling right now.
Absolutely.
But also like the internal stuff is good too. I've been messing around. I didn't actually realize that this got a standalone release, but a Medieval showed up on these things.
Right.
Which is one of my favorite PC games in the last few years. And they did a great VR version, right? Like real integration of the weapons and feel. It's not just like a playing that game in first person or in VR, but like it actually works like super well on these headsets, not connected to your PC. And the standalone experience, all the levels are there. I mean, obviously they cut the visuals back in where they needed to, but it's convincing. So, I've definitely had a change of heart. I wired VR still has a benefit. I think, especially for maybe if you're playing like cockpit games, driving games, things like that, a wired VR headset would still probably make the most sense just in terms of being ready to go. There's no battery to worry about. Right. And there are still ways to push the image quality higher on some of those headsets. But what I'm seeing right now, I think when I play PC VR and it's got me back into it, I'm just going to be going for these wireless headsets primarily.
Nice.
Fantastic.
But John, I have to talk about the elephant in the room and why are you so inconsistent with your opinions? Why do you keep changing your opinion, John? What's that about?
It's almost like you've received new information that actually makes you reassess the situation.
It's more like technology improves.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, the thing is like every other streaming service I've tested. Okay, I guess. Okay, that's the thing to consider with the wireless here is that this is within the same house. You're basically piping like a direct wired connection and beaming the wireless directly from the router to the headset. That works. Going over the internet would be a very different beast. And in fact, if I tried to walk to any other room in the house besides the room with the router in it, the connection absolutely dies and the experience becomes unusable like instantly. It's actually pretty funny how like you just walk up the steps, walk to the kitchen, and it's like, oh, it doesn't work.
It just doesn't work. Okay.
It's very sensitive to being. You need to have very good Wi-Fi for this to work effectively, is what I'm saying.
Or be close enough. Or be close
enough. Or be very close to the source for it to work. When you're there, it's perfect. Otherwise, not so much. And I also think, again, when you're inside a VR headset, due to the way those screens and lenses work, streaming artifacts become less noticeable. Versus, say, I remember we did the Fortnite test at Gamescom. And they were like, can you tell the difference? They had two PCs there. They had a fake one in there. And they were like, they were expecting us to have to like look at like a microscope. And I'm like, I literally sat down. I was like, this is streaming. And they just had this like disappointed, like, yeah, okay, you're right.
Yeah, don't look closer. They, like, I remember when I just like leaned in a little. He's like, don't look any closer. Don't look any closer. That's okay.
So on a direct monitor, yeah, it's still pretty obvious. And honestly, they're faced with their challenges as well. But for VR, I think the benefits of going wireless are so high that it makes sense, especially because just the cable itself is actually a nuisance, I think, when you're doing any sort of full body motion gaming.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Okay, fair enough. Okay. Well, that's the end of our news discussion topics for this week. So let's move on to supporter Q&A. So every week we post on our Patreon a call for questions, and supporters can basically ask anything that they want. You know, we give them an idea of what we're going to be talking about, but you know, any question, it's all fair game. I'm going to kick off with this one from Leftist Hominid. I recently heard that EGS is bleeding money, Epic Games Store, that is. My understanding is that it was not a cromulent launcher, and thus I have never even bothered making an account on it. If EGS were cromulent, do you think it could be profitable? Now, you might be wondering what the word cromulent means. So according to dictionary.com...
Oh, it's from The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it is. Well, it's on the dictionary, Alex.
Oh, that must mean it's real.
Yeah, it means acceptable or adequate. And the given example is the continental breakfast was perfectly cromulent. But apparently, according to Leftist Hominid, the Epic Game Store isn't.
No.
So, yeah, I mean, this was a disclosure this week that they still haven't, Epic still is not making money on the Epic Game Store, and therefore it's probably losing money. The extent to which it is losing money and whether it could be assumed that it's quote unquote bleeding money remains to be seen. But we were 5 years into the Epic Game Store as a thing. I think it is, yeah. And what do you make of it? Because apparently it's not cromulent.
No, it's not cromulent. I made a joke video.
You did
it's a real video, by the way. It is not. It's a joke. I made a joke. It's a joke out of it, but it was totally real. So don't think I was like faking that. That was all real stuff. But
so
actually,
you had Alan Wake 2. You were trying to use the quote unquote quick launcher in the Epic Game Store, and then you actually had imported the game as a non-Steam app into the Steam launcher, and the Steam launcher loaded it quicker.
Yeah. And the reason for that is, first of all, EGS for me, and I think everyone can attest to this, don't say you don't do this, is that it's very variable. I showed it launching one of the times where it had a variable startup time. Sometimes it goes really quickly, sometimes it doesn't, but there's no transparency as to why. So I can't tell you why.
It's fine on my system.
It's fine on your system. That's cool, bro.
Just kidding.
But seriously, I showed a variable launch time there, and it was just like not good that time I launched it up. But whatever, that was the time I had the recording, so that's why it's funny. But the bigger thing is actually if after you start up EGS, its interface is a lot less responsive. I think,
Yeah.
than after like
It's
a couple
bad.
seconds. Like that's one thing, and I think that's universal to everyone who uses UGS.
Look, I have the EGS store loaded right now. I double clicked on it and it shows a little splash screen still. It opens up the whole window to Epic Game Store in the middle for about like 3 or 4 seconds. Steam doesn't do that.
No, it's there's a different level of responsiveness for it all. But it's not just that. It's not cromulent. It is uncromulent in a couple other areas. Like for doing the Alan Wake 2 video, I was like, oh man, Alan Wake 2 is installed to my C drive. I want to make sure it's launching from a different drive. You can Google how to launch things and install them to different drives in EGS. It is some Linux level crap there. Like, it is dumb. It is. I can't believe that Xbox does it better. The Xbox app does it better. Probably EA's Origin did it better when EA Origin came out. I'd imagine Ubisoft Launcher, I haven't used it in a while, but I imagine it does it better. You can't actually manually choose where you install games in EGS. What?
You sure?
Yeah, you cannot. It just installs to wherever EGS is installed to. It's so bad. Yeah,
I'm
it does.
pretty sure you can.
No. Give it a Google. It's hilarious. It's still this way. It's so bad. You have to manually copy files over to have it installed at other locations.
Okay.
That's all I have to say about that. No, but seriously, it's not just that. It's also lacking all the features of Steam, like the community features, the nice forums. Yes, they're cesspool at times, but you can find some information there, like the entire highlighting that Steam has for smaller games that is usable. The wish listing, I don't think, is even in EGS. EGS wish list. I got to Google this because I've never. Oh, it was added. Never mind. I'm sorry. It was added. I'm so bad. Womp, 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 womp. But either way, there's a lot of things where I think the reason why they're, if you're saying this, if they are bleeding money, it's probably because they're spending a lot of money on buying exclusives or timed exclusives. And those give them the headlines, and that's why people talk about EGS all the time. But otherwise, if they didn't do that, I don't think they would get the mind share from their otherwise feature set, speed, performance, etc. Like, it's just not there with Steam, and that's why I think even if, regardless of everything else, if you talk about this politically, like, because you're worried like Steam has this monopoly, it's like, but Steam is also doing a lot of things better too. Don't forget that. Like, please don't forget that.
There's a Epic Game Store VR.
Oh no, it is a UE4 app, by the way. The EGS app it also runs at 38. It also only updates at 30 hertz. Is another thing.
Okay.
So it doesn't have as good performance as.
Well, it's clearly not cromulent then.
It's not cromulent.
It's not cromulent. But to Leftist Hominid's point, I think I don't think that the quality of the launcher is really the defining factor of whether it's commercially successful or not. It's, the reason it's not successful is because they're spending a huge amount of money on free games and exclusives, right?
Yeah,
that's the bottom line.
But if they didn't do that, would they get anybody using it in the first place?
That's a good question. But, I think Tim Sweeney was pretty open about the fact that they'd need to spend untold millions to actually compete against Steam. I just wish that the actual level of competition was not just about game availability, but also about how good the actual feature set of the launcher is, and the surrounding ecosystem. You can definitely make the point that Steam is a proper ecosystem, whereas EGS is just a launcher. Mm-hmm. There's not much more to it. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Mr. Codders. Hi, team. Some people are calling the new PlayStation 5 a quote-unquote slim model, but it is simply a drop-in replacement for the current models. Do you think we can expect a true slim model in the future? Thanks. Keep up the good work. I'll tackle this one quickly, I think, unless you guys have got something to add. But, it is smaller, but the defining work that allowed it to be smaller was the 6nm processor, which we got last year. In terms of actually making a proper slim model, you're going to need another shrink, right? And for commercial reasons, even though 4 or 5nm is available, none of the console manufacturers have gone for it, which is quite interesting. It's only AMD with the 7840U and the Z1 Extreme and ROG Ally, that kind of thing, that are actually using those process nodes at the moment, by which we could assume that they're not economically viable for a console. And we're still facing the situation where price drops on consoles are kind of not happening. In fact, prices are going up. We had this amazing summer sale of PlayStation, but it looks like the new Slim model, which is a cheaper rendition of the same console, is back up to the previous prices, and there have been actual price increases on the digital model in the US, which is quite interesting. So I think it's basically, you know, if you want a slim console in the future, it's going to be when those new process nodes are actually good value for the console manufacturers. So yeah, we're at the point now where, you know, it's been announced now with the Microsoft leak, revealed via the Microsoft leak, that the revisions for Series X and Series S coming 2024, late 24, are going to be 6 nanometer, not 5 or 4 nanometer. And that is the next big process shrink. And 6 nanometer from 7 is more of an iterative step. But for whatever reason, that, you know, the console manufacturers are not seeing value there. Do you think we're going to see a slim model in future, John, in any form?
This is the slim model.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll see a super slim.
Oh, no.
No.
That didn't work out so well last time.
No.
Super slim. There's nothing super about it whatsoever.
Obviously, there's still the PS5 Pro to think about, which we expect is likely to happen. The question there is, do they continue with the Chad Warden popped collar look, or do they actually go for something new? If they go for something new, that opens the door for an actual revised regular PS5, right? Because I guess technically they don't do they call this new one the PS5 Slim? Or is it just
they don't.
Exactly.
No.
So it's just the PlayStation 5.
It's just the new PlayStation 5.
The new PlayStation 5. So I could see them maybe doing that, but they've also put a lot of R&D obviously into this whole replaceable drive thing, and it's really tough to say what they're going to do there, but I don't feel that confident that we'll see another redesign of the original PS5 anytime soon necessarily.
It's going to take a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all going to come down to what form the PlayStation 5 Pro is going to take and what process. I mean, if they're using 5/4 nanometer in PS5 Pro, which I kind of think they really should be, then at that point you would think that 5 nanometer, 4 nanometer is actually economically viable for a mass-produced console.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just interesting that we aren't seeing those nodes that actually being used right now when, you know, graphics card makers are using it. It's used for, CPUs from AMD. Obviously, it's been used in smartphones for a long time. They're down to 3 nanometer now, which is kind of baffling. But yeah, I mean, I think we're going to be waiting for some time. There could be a Super Slim, but let's just hope it's better than the PS3 Super Slim, which was genuinely an awful console.
No, it's not that bad.
It is. That sliding tray is horrible.
Yeah, but okay.
It is. Yeah.
Quick flash update. I said something. I spoke earlier.
Oh, is this Future Alex?
This is Future Alex. Future Alex. You can install the different drives on EGS. What I was talking about, and I used the wrong phraseology, is you cannot move them to a different drive.
Yeah,
after you install them. That's what I was trying.
That's what I thought you were talking about.
Well, I think I said I installed it to the right drive. I was using the word install, but you cannot move them to a different drive without doing shenanigans. Once again, shenanigans. So Future Alex, coming at you.
So do you think there's a certain level of extra chromulancy? No?
Their chromulant level has improved by 3 shades.
Okay, that's a scientific term. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Dennis Lofgren. Hi DF crew, exclamation point. I recently realized that I don't actually know the difference between ray tracing and path tracing. I always assumed, based on how path tracing has been presented by DF, that it is just a better, more complete version of ray tracing. However, when looking it up, I only became more confused. Path tracing seems to actually be less accurate. Could the DF crew please provide an explainer on this difference and why you usually present it as the more desired option. Have you talked about this recently? Have I missed the explainer? Thank you and keep up the good work. Well, what do you say about that, Alex? Because have you been gaslighting us?
I've been gaslighting all of you. No, what they are saying is actually true in the aspect of, so path tracing, just simple. If you shoot a ray to hit something and then you test it and just say, like, did I hit that? That's ray tracing. Whatever you do after the fact doesn't really matter. Path tracing is where you shoot a ray, and after it hits something, you say, well, actually, how do I inform anything about the information that I want to gather about this thing that I just hit? Well, then you shoot another ray to gather more information about it. And if you do that iteratively in a random manner, Monte Carlo, path tracing, you get a really detailed image about all of the lighting from that one pixel's perspective. The reason why, Dennis, that you come to the idea that it looks like a less complete image, it looks worse, is because for it to be so random and for it to be completely perfect and to get the best image possible, it's like really random and it requires a lot of rays to do it. So like if you're looking at a path traced image takes a lot longer to converge to a good looking image. And it takes a lot more processing power and whatnot. So that's what you're saying is true. But in the context of real time, it means more visual, goodness, because one, denoisers are a lot better. You have real-time denoisers that are cleaning these things up. We just talked about ray reconstruction recently. But the thing is, like, when you just do like a normal ray trace, and you can use like how you inform the shading of that pixels that you just ray traced. Sometimes you like do another ray trace where you say like, okay, is this thing in shadow or not? A lot of games do that if they do ray tracing. So they're doing a slight little bit of path tracing there. They're seeing if like the thing's in shadow after they ray trace it. But usually that's about it. And the rest of the shading is ridiculously simple. Path tracing is saying, actually, I'm going to inform the shading of things that are ray traced by ray tracing again. And so that's why
that's why it's so expensive.
And that's why it's so expensive. You're like ray tracing again. And that's why in Alan Wake 2, when you look at a reflection on an opaque surface, you can see the reflections of something else in that opaque surface. Like, it's really, really cool to see interreflections, which is something that video games don't have. It's really expensive. And that's why Alan Wake 2 is really expensive to render with that option turned on. But we are not gaslighting you. It should usually be better. It won't always be the most stable image in comparison to some other technique, because ray tracing is just sparse and problematic in general, but it'll produce a more accurate image usually.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that clears that up.
There we go.
So let's move on to the next question. This one from Agsma. Hi, DF. Carl Jobst, latest video. I hope I got the pronunciation right there.
That was a good one.
Jobst. Okay. Hi, DF. Carl Jobst, latest video on the retro gaming market crash gives me some faith in humanity. However, I'm still hesitant to consider it a victory for gaming collectors and go to a CEX store and buy a PS1 or a Sega Mega Drive game more frequently at the cost of an arm or a leg, most of the time incomplete and/or without a box. Can you speculate how long it will take for the market to settle down and introduce affordable prices for the regular consumer? Thanks and good work with the coverage as of late. So, John, has there been a crash in retro gaming prices?
I was not familiar with that specific video, but I have definitely noticed prices coming somewhat down, or at least sort of stabilizing somewhat. Mm-hmm. It is an interesting time right now for that, actually. The thing is, though, is like the actual really rare stuff isn't going to get cheap. But what does seem to be happening is that the normal stuff is becoming more affordable again, thankfully. So it's like there was a time where it's like, oh, I want to get this really common game like Super Mario Brothers 3 or something that sold millions of copies, and people were charging an unreasonable amount for it. But I've started to see games like that in that ilk selling for cheaper lately, basically, is what's going on. So I think I don't know how to speculate on this, because the retro market is weird and how it works, and it just sort of, a lot of it seems to go with certain people getting into a bubble, and it's almost like a coming of age thing, right? Where like a certain group of people reach a certain age and like, oh, I want to go back and collect the system I was a big fan of back then, and that's constantly shifting upwards, right? And then the consoles older than that already had the collectors, come in there and sweep everything up. Some of that's the common stuff starts to drop down again and become more affordable, where the big heavy hitters, they're not going to get any cheaper. In fact, I have not seen any evidence of the big games actually coming down in price, which is a shame because there's a few heavy hitters I would like to add to my collection, but I have come to the conclusion I will never get a copy of, say, Gimmick for Famicom or some of the others as well, like a proper Battlemania Daiginjo as well for the Mega Drive. The prices are just too high.
What about when you were in Japan? Did you?
Oh, well,
was that a different situation?
Prices there are interesting because my frame of reference is versus when I lived there for a year, 2005 versus now. Obviously, they got way more expensive compared to back then. Everybody knows that, though. Retro games in general did. The prices, though, for me, when you take into account the exchange rate, were very good, I would say. They were much lower than what you could get over here if you were trying to buy Japanese games. Right. So that definitely helped make things a lot more affordable. So I was able to get a few heavy hitters over there because they were significantly cheaper than I would normally be able to get them for here. But that's just an exchange rate thing.
Right.
Not so much like, right. The whole market hasn't come down on that. In Japan, though, like even then, even if you ignore the exchange rate, like the common games have always kind of remained relatively affordable. Like they used to be dirt cheap, like 50 cents or less for some of this stuff. Now it's going up a bit, but it's not like expensive. I would say it's very affordable for a lot of that. Okay. US stuff tends to be US stuff does tend to be fairly expensive on many systems, I would say. PAL stuff is usually pretty easy to get, I find, since he mentioned CEX. I mean, I have seen the prices go up there as well, but like, why would you ever want to buy a PlayStation 1 PAL game? Mega Drive, sure, because a lot of those are actually not localized, or they're not converted to run in PAL mode. So if you play them on a 60 hertz system, they just work better. So like, it's totally fine to get a PAL version, but PS1 games doesn't work like that, and they mostly suck.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow.
Yep.
You know.
So, John, I actually have a question. The game you mentioned, Gimmick, would you be cool? It's too rare, obviously, to get, too expensive to get the original cartridge, but what about like a community reprint of the cartridge?
So there's two things about that. I am actually okay enough with reprints of certain games if it's rare enough like that. But first of all, a lot of those reprints, I want to add this in here, use flash ROM chips, which maybe don't have the same lifetime expectancy as a mask ROM chip, which is something to think about. And depending on how it's manufactured, there can be issues with like the way the cartridge, the slot is beveled. It's the edge connector on the board itself. If it's not beveled properly, it can actually damage your card slot, things like that. But with Gimmick, the bigger problem is that it uses a special sound chip from Sunsoft, which is amazing, by the way. It sounds really, really good. But if you try to use that cartridge, whether it's, first of all, you have to replicate the sound chip. And once you do that, if you try to use it on a non-Japanese Famicom or a Famicom compatible slot, the actual pin within the cartridge slot for that sound channel is not attached. Right, so you actually don't get correct sound at all. So, as a result, like you see, there was a re-release of Gimmick on modern platforms, and it was okay enough, but it's just a basic emulation, right? I also had hoped for a cartridge re-release, but I don't think that they're gonna do it because of this, because they can't just make a single board for all regions. They could release the Scandinavian version of Gimmick, but that has it only came out in Scandinavian countries besides Japan. But they didn't include the audio chip for that version, so it actually sounds much worse. And it was PAL only as well, so whatever. Okay. There's a lot of like hurdles to jump through with regards to re-releasing games. I've found like that, depending on what's in the cartridge. It's less so for 16-bit systems though. I think that usually works better because there's not as much special hardware needed, and the cartridge ports are the same across all regions.
Yeah.
I actually just got a Famicom game right here in the mail just now. Shall we see what's in the box?
Go on then.
Let's do it. Go on then. Go on, lads.
This is especially compelling viewing for those listening to the podcast.
Yes, exactly.
Describe
so
the
I'll
box
just describe
in excruciating detail.
I saw this for a rather surprisingly low price, actually, so I picked it up. It is
maybe the retro market is crashing.
Famicom version of it says Pajama Hero Nemo. It's
that classic.
Nemo. It's the little Nemo the Dream Master for NES. It's the Famicom one. It's a really cool little Capcom game, and I've added it to the collection. So there you go. And yeah, maybe you're right. The market is crashing, and it was much cheaper than usual. That might be the reason.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. This one from Victor, but the I and the O are 1 and 0. Just point that out. Hello, Digital F- fellas! Exclamation point. Now that Rockstar is on the radar again, have you wondered about the lack of a simple update for Red Dead Redemption 2 for PlayStation 5 and Series X to run at 60 FPS, along with quote-unquote increased settings? It was ported from consoles that finally were basically like PCs to newer consoles that are even closer to them. So no excuse. Some people think they are just too busy and won't put the unjustified resources, but they already did most of the job for PC. So wouldn't it just be an easy patch for a game that doesn't need any remaster from a company so big and resourceful, at least as a basic quality of life service for the legions of fans that have made them billionaires? Alex,
hey, Victor.
I mean, you looked at Red Dead Redemption 2 on PC back in the day, which you would think would be the basis for any work for a PlayStation 5 and Series X version. I mean, it's doable, isn't it? I mean, the concept of moving a PC version onto a console isn't that easy, though, is it? I mean, fundamentally, especially on PlayStation.
On PlayStation, it wouldn't be as simple, and like when I went back then, like it was RTX 2080 Ti was like roughly console settings at 60 FPS, but it wasn't necessarily so perfect. It was kind of borderline at 4K 60, and it doesn't like I've seen a lot of people. Obviously, the image quality on PS4 Pro that is inherited on PS5 is also an issue for a lot of people. That I always see people talk about that, but going up to like a straight 4K and then a straight 60 after that is not necessarily guaranteed, I would say, just because the game is it's still pretty heavy. If you run it at 4K, it's still pretty heavy. But I think they could manage something, and it should be way better than what they currently did. Regardless of anything I said about the feasibility of just porting over the PC version, they have enough money to do this. People like this game. People like this game. That's all I'll say. Like, I'm surprised they haven't done it and just resold it. Like, I really am surprised they haven't resold it. It would be cool if it were a patch, but that isn't the way they roll usually, to my knowledge.
I think it's tricky because I think in terms of your computer, I mean, well, let's look at the last gen versions, right? See, Xbox One X, 4K 30. We've seen via backcompat that some titles don't achieve double the performance under a Series X backcompat. It's going to require a fair bit of engineering effort to get 4K 60 working, and maybe the solution would be some sort of quality and performance mode using the various feature sets available on the PC version of the game.
Like Avatar, for example.
Possibly, yeah. Yeah, that would kind of make sense, right? There's definitely more they could do with the PlayStation 5 version, because the 4 Pro version just had that really quite horrible checkerboarding, which didn't work great. In terms of why they don't do it, I suspect probably their focus is on Grand Theft Auto 6 at the moment. I guess they could farm it out, but that isn't typically Rockstar's style. I agree, though, that there's definitely money on the table being left here, but at the same time, we didn't get an upgrade for GTA 5 on PC. The RT stuff never made it on there. It just seems, Rockstar have different priorities. Don't know if you've got anything to add to that, John.
Not really. I mean, it's a shame, but that seems to be how it is. They're not interested in that for whatever reason, even though it would technically be easy money.
Yeah.
Which is actually surprising because that's usually the way things go. It's like having a lot of money is not okay. You need all the money, and they could have all the money. Even though they already seem to have all the money, they could have even more. So
absolutely. It does seem like a no-brainer. You'd expect something to happen at some point, right?
Exactly. I agree. But whatever. We'll see.
Okay. Let's move on to our final question, and it's from The Collector. A question for Richard. Why do you think DF is the only, in brackets, last best gaming technology news/reviews channel? I recall back to an era long forgotten where PC gaming magazines would be full of gaming tech articles covering anti-aliasing methods and interviews with developers and creative producers, etc. But other than DF, none of that made it into the social media/video age. What happened? Good question. How do you answer this one? I think basically the nature of media has changed, where there's a pressure to get new content out en masse as soon as possible, right? And that's just not how you do Digital Foundry work.
Yeah.
And it took us 3-4 years to actually break even, to actually make this a financially viable enterprise. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination. But, there have been some interesting articles recently. I noticed PC Gamer did quite a big explainer on mesh shaders and what they are and why they're needed for Alan Wake 2. But yeah, I kind of get what they're saying there. John, thoughts?
I mean, I don't think we're not the only ones doing it, I guess, but it's not, I guess it's not that common because it does demand like such a serious time commitment to do this stuff well, I think. And I think with the way sites are generally run, that's difficult to allow, right?
Justify.
Yeah. To justify financially and just in terms of time commitment. I mean, it's usually about getting news out as fast as possible and having an entire team dedicated to doing these types of things where it's like each singular project is going to take at least a week usually. That's a tough one, I think. And you need somebody at the top that's really interested and they really want to do this and make it great. And, we obviously have that here with the man himself there.
Well, and back in the day, Rupert Lohman, obviously.
Oh yeah. Rupert as well. That's exactly right. We wouldn't be here if not for Rupert actually supporting that whole idea, right? He made it possible to actually turn this into something that's viable.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. That's all I can really say about this. But you've basically got to back quality, and you've got to have confidence that quality will actually result in an audience. And, if it took us 3-4 years to actually make this whole thing viable, then that's the challenge facing anybody that's going to come into this market, into this area of the market, this very specific niche of the market. I think on the plus side, although I'd say that the tech press for PC is in a pretty good state at the moment. And there's a lot of really successful outlets out there which have, but they too have done the hard work, right? Gamers Nexus is a great example of a channel that took years to develop into what it is today. And I mean, for whatever reason, the mainstream press doesn't really seem that interested in the sort of stuff that we cover that much these days.
They may not know anything about it either. That's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Niche
the other thing, of course. Yeah, it's really difficult to find people who can do the job. Do you have anything to add to this, Alex, from a PC perspective?
I also think news cycles are pretty important part of it. Obviously, it's so if you start at one project and you've got a lot of ways in it, but then something comes out and you really need to report on it, you can interrupt it regardless of whatever your initial intention was, because you need to make sure you're covering something because the audience wants to see it, and it will definitely help the bottom line. So it's not always just it's like sometimes you do need to keep up with what everyone else is doing just to even stay afloat. So like we do videos at times where it's like we know we're covering it not because of our personal interest. Like sometimes I'd rather be covering something else, but because I know the audience wants to see this. So it's a pull, it's a tug and pull. It's hard. It's not just one source of why the way they are.
I think it's just that this work is really hard, and games have got a lot more complex, and you have to be on top of a lot of the new stuff that's happening. And a lot of it's really difficult to follow, right? And that's what we try and do here. I mean, obviously, we try and act as, basically trying to explain it to a wider audience, a lot of this stuff that's happening. But it's really difficult,
Yeah, that's the thing with these projects. There's the figuring it all out kind of thing. There's actually playing the game, and there's the capturing it, figuring out what you want to say, what you want to write, getting all the hard legwork done there. And then there's editing the thing, the production stuff, the filming stuff. We don't have a team of people doing that. Like, we each do our own thing, right? Yeah. And which is rewarding, but it does take time.
Yeah. What I will say,
necessary.
I mean, the concept of doing a written piece of work for a website is far, far easier than doing a video.
Yes.
Oh gosh, yes.
Yes.
I mean, it's just screenshots and text, really, which is basically the very, very beginnings of a video project. The
pretty
raw
much.
assets. Yeah, wow, I didn't really think about that, but that is certainly true. It's video is just a completely different enterprise. I don't really know what more we can really add to that one, except to say that I'd love to see other people do this stuff as well. The issue is that coming into this and doing it straight off the bat, it's just not easy. It's a lot of growing pains.
Because we can't cover everything. That's the thing. There's stuff that I want to know that I'm curious about that we don't have time to even look at. And it's
this happens all the time. Like all that PC myth busting, we talk about it. Like there's just not enough time in the world.
Yeah, there's always more ideas than there are videos. That's the bottom line.
Just because it takes so long to make each piece of content.
Actually, if there's one thing I would like AI to do, and this is nothing, it's not about taking my job away from me, but if it could somehow make my editing process easier, not editing the video for me, but obviously the creative thing is that's all me, but like the manually moving my hand across the screen to like cut up videos, etc. That's all stuff that, that could be aided by AI in any sense of the word.
Really?
Maybe.
How would it know what to cut?
AI bros, you do your magic.
How about this? It's like you're capturing the game live, and you say, "Oh, Premiere, put this shot in there," and it just captures it and sticks it on the timeline for you.
Do it.
I think we're in the realms of science fiction here.
Yeah, we are.
AI is a cure-all.
No, definitely not.
No.
Okay, well, that's just, the best answer you're going to get to that particular question, and therefore it is the end of the show. So if you did enjoy it, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for instant notifications, please do consider the DF supporter program. If we're talking about financial viability, that's made all of the difference for us. But yeah, that's all from us for this week, and I guess we'll see you next week for DF Direct Weekly 138. But in the meantime, thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.